Thank you for watching the supplemental 10th and 11th Street Viaduct Replacement Major Investment Study presentation on environmental and railroad requirements, constraints, and considerations within the study. As a reminder, the mission of the South Dakota Department of Transportation is we provide a safe and efficient public transportation system. Additional information on the DOT's mission and vision is provided on their website at dot.sd.gov. The purpose of this supplemental presentation is to provide additional information regarding environmental and railroad requirements, constraints, and considerations. These elements play a significant role in what is and is not feasible for different roadway alignments, the height of the roadway, whether the roadway needs to be on a bridge or can be placed on embankment, and ultimately what feasible concepts entail. While this presentation does get a bit technical with regulatory type requirements, hopefully it clarifies elements the study team are analyzing behind the scenes and considerations have gone into the concepts being presented at the open houses. At the end of the day, there are a number of requirements the study must adhere to, and this area is not necessarily the blank canvas it may appear to be at first glance. Several recreational properties and trails exist adjacent and under the 10th and 11th Street Viaduct. These properties are not only important amenities for the community, they also require special consideration during concept development and the environmental review process. Section 4F of the U.S. DOT Act of 1966 and Section 6F of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act of 1965 both have restrictions in selection of alternatives for projects that impact recreational properties. Section 4F of the U.S. DOT Act of 1966 imposes strict limitations on project alternatives for transportation projects that involve the use of publicly owned parks and recreational areas, including recreational trails. The U.S. DOT, including agencies like the Federal Highway Administration, cannot approve a project alternative that uses Section 4F resources unless there is no feasible and prudent alternative that avoids such use. A feasible alternative is one that can be implemented with sound engineering, while a prudent alternative avoids severe social, economic, environmental, or operational problems that outweigh the importance of protecting the resource. Alternatives that avoid Section 4F properties must be thoroughly evaluated and documented and consider factors like safety, cost, community disruption, and environmental impacts. For the 10th and 11th Street Viaduct Replacement Project, which is being funded through Federal Highway Administration, conversion of park or recreational areas to non-recreational use, such as street right-of-way, would require review that illustrates no other feasible and prudent alternative exists that avoids or better minimizes the use of park or recreational property. This can limit which alternatives are brought forward for further review. Large shifts or changes in the roadway may be eliminated from review if a feasible and prudent alternative exists that still meets the project's purpose and needs. Section 6F of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act of 1965 imposes limitations on projects that convert properties acquired or developed with LWCF funds to non-outdoor recreational uses. Properties acquired or developed with LWCF funds must remain dedicated to public outdoor recreation in perpetuity. Any conversion of these properties or portions of the properties to non-recreational uses, such as for transportation projects, is prohibited unless approved by the Secretary of the Interior through the National Park Service. If conversion of a recreational area to non-recreational use is proposed, the project proponent, in this case Federal Highway Administration, the DOT, and City of Sioux Falls, must provide replacement property of at least equal fair market value and reasonably equivalent recreational usefulness and location. Before approving a conversion, all practical alternatives to using the LWCF funded property must be evaluated. This includes exploring project alignments or designs that avoid or minimize impacts on the Section 6F property. If conversion is unavoidable, mitigation measures, including replacement land, must be identified. Coordination with the National Park Service and South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks is mandatory to confirm Section 6F impacts, ensure compliance, and prepare a conversion request package. Faywick Park and Beetle Greenway Park have both received LWCF funding and are thereby subject to Section 6F provisions. Both Section 4F and Section 6F have implications on concept development and decision making. Because Section 4F requires Federal Highway Administration to only approve those feasible and prudent alternatives that have been shown to have the least impact on recreational properties, careful consideration needs to occur on where and how far the road can be shifted. We would like to stress that completely removing large sections of park for additional roadway would be unlikely to pass the feasible and prudent and least impact analysis. Section 6F is less rigid, but would require a conversion of use approval from the National Park Service along with replacement of lost property. The City of Sioux Falls is a participating community of the National Flood Insurance Program, also referred to as NFIP, through FEMA. The NFIP establishes regulatory special flood hazard areas, often referred to as floodplain and floodways, on flood-prone bodies of water to help reduce the risk of flooding. Participating communities agree to adopt and enforce ordinances that meet or exceed the FEMA requirements established under the Code of Federal Regulations for preserving the conveyance capacity for rivers and minimizing flood risk. As part of the City of Sioux Falls Floodplain Ordinance, the city regulates construction within both the established floodplain and floodway. The floodway is considered the most critical area of a river that must be reserved for conveying the base floodwaters. Communities must regulate development in the floodway to ensure that there are no increases in the upstream flood elevations as a result of the development. Any development in the floodway requires extensive analysis to determine a no-rise condition as a result of the development, and any revisions to the floodway must demonstrate that no other practicable alternatives exist to the revision of the floodway. Based on these criteria, fill in the floodway should be avoided if possible to preserve the conveyance capacity of the river and avoid adverse impacts caused by increases in the floodwater elevations as a result of development in the floodway. This is particularly noteworthy when looking at different roadway alignments and profile options for 10th and 11th Streets. According to the City of Sioux Falls Floodplain Ordinance, any fill in the floodplain will require compensatory storage in the same general areas of the water body to replace any lost flood storage volume. Compensatory storage can be difficult to achieve for constrained sites, such as this one, and where extensive compensatory storage is required. For the 10th and 11th Street Viaduct replacement project, each alternative needs to preserve the critical floodway area by minimizing alterations to the flood conveyance of the Big Sioux River and maintaining a no-rise condition. As a result, bridge concepts being shown at the open houses completely span the floodway to minimize impacts to the river. Fill in the floodplain for the project will require compensatory storage for the flood volume lost. Knowing that the current project site is very constrained, any fill in the floodplain must be strategically evaluated to ensure that all lost flood volume can be compensated for within the project limits. The Viaduct Replacement Study Team met with the Ellison Eastern Railroad in November 2024 and BNSF in January 2025 to introduce the study and discuss requirements to incorporate into the conceptual design. One of the topics discussed with BNSF in particular was the possibility of converting the grade-separated overpass to at-grade rail crossings for pedestrians, vehicles, or both. At a minimum, BNSF requires closure of 2 public crossings for any new public at-grade crossing within their right-of-way, and this applies to both a street or a pedestrian-only at-grade crossing. However, even if 2 public crossings are identified for closure, that does not guarantee a new at-grade crossing. BNSF would still analyze the location and weigh the benefits and drawbacks of a new at-grade crossing. The study team's discussions with BNSF determined that a 10th and 11th Street at-grade rail crossing is unlikely. Safety for motorists, pedestrians, and bicyclists was a top concern as trespassing on railroad property in the downtown area, the number of rails and wide BNSF right-of-way being crossed, and train frequency underneath the viaduct were key contributors to this concern. Train frequency through downtown is not anticipated to decrease, and if anything will increase over time. Further, BNSF uses the area under the viaduct to serve customers along the spur that extends southward. An at-grade crossing would also lead to significant route reliability and operational concerns for emergency services, event traffic, and daily traffic traveling to, from, and through downtown. And with that, our direction is that the consolidated rail network that is out there today is the one that needs to be planned for with this study. BNSF has indicated that the conceptual design needs to account for the tracks that are out there today, plus room for an additional track and an access road. Both BNSF and South Dakota Department of Transportation have clearance requirements for bridges over railroads. BNSF requires a minimum of 23 feet 6 inches vertically from the top of rail to the low beam on the bridge. This vertical clearance must extend to 9 feet on each side of the track center line. Horizontally, a substructure horizontal clearance of 27 feet or greater from center line of the track is advantageous as this reduces design requirements of the bridge supports. Substructures less than this distance must be crashworthy, which increases sizes and costs. Ellison Eastern clearance requirements are expected to follow DOT guidelines. Those requirements are 23 feet 3.5 inches vertical clearance and 25 feet horizontal clearance from center line of track to substructure. A conceptual plan for meeting horizontal and vertical clearance requirements is shown on this slide, where the study team has outlined existing and future rail lines and BNSF access roads, the required clearance envelopes, and potential bridge substructure locations. This concept is still preliminary and will be refined as part of Phase 3 of the study. If you have questions on any of these topics, please reach out to one of the study contacts at the South Dakota Department of Transportation, City of Sioux Falls, or consultant team. Additional information and opportunities to submit comments and questions are available on the study website. Thank you.